Great.
Amazing. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone on the internet. Just kicking this off here. So, hi, my name is Ashley, and I'm an Agile coach and DevOps Transformation Innovation Delivery Lead at Agile by Design. And I'm a very proud stream owner of the AISC steering committee. And it's a great community of machine learning practitioners and researchers who have gathered around topics in AI research, engineering, and products. And we host free live sessions, just like this one, 3 to 5 times a week, and produce premium content in various subject areas. So I want everybody at this point here to just kind of press pause on the video or just kind of open up another tab and go to ai.science and log in and check out some slides like this one here and check out talks, as well as there's a lot of learning, a lot of really great tutorials and ways of getting leveled up on the AI side. And make sure to press subscribe on the YouTube channel when you get a sec as well, because this is really going to help you stay in touch with what we do on a daily basis or weekly basis. We currently have 14 live streams, 14 streams that are focused on various ML topics. And this one here that you're listening to today is in the AI and product stream. So most of the conversations we have in this stream are around things like we're going to talk about today, the messy side of AI and product and the challenges that you as a product owner or product manager or just somebody who's developing a new product in AI, those are the kinds of things you're going to want to bring in as perspectives to help you be more successful. Today's conversation, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm happy to introduce you to Yerzat Marat. I'm hoping I was okay on the pronunciation there. So Yerzat has worked in both enterprise and startup settings. He started as a project manager in a traditional waterfall sense of the word in mining and metals. And he was focused more on designing industrial automation and IT solutions for underground mines and processing plants. I know literally nothing about mining. So I'm really excited to not only hear that side of things, but tie in some of these AI perspectives. So at one point, he discovered that a bunch of things he was studying in grad school were now being called machine learning, and joined an AI-based startup focusing on delivering machine learning solutions for the mining and metals industry. So really tying together his understanding of ML as well as mining and metals. And there he set up a branch in Kazakhstan, where he's originally from, by the way, and got his first client for a 3-year subscription deal. Okay, so we're going to hear a little bit more about that. So in 2020, he landed in Canada and became part of AISC and discovered there are apparently some things he could share. And yeah, thank you, Amir, for finding Yerzat and bringing him into this conversation, because as I've seen the slides already, it's a really, really interesting story about AI implementation. And a lot of the tutorials we implement online and a lot of the call it the dreamy sequences we imagine when we're developing AI products are literally that, dreams. And what we really need to come into contact with is the reality. So whether you've got a mess of your own or are about to embark on a messy journey of your own, because it's going to be a mess, this talk is going to be great because it's going to give you what I said earlier, that full contact moment with reality, as well as a real eye-opening story for you about what it's actually like to go on an AI development journey in a rather challenging situation. But imagine that you're in this with him, and therefore you can kind of absorb these learnings, and then we'll engage in a conversation as we go. So as Yerzat's going, we're going to stop a couple times throughout his presentation so that we can have a conversation about some of the things he's been talking about. And this is an opportunity for you in the chat to ask a question. And if you've got a question, I've got the chat window over here. So if you have something, I'll be able to see it and I'll be able to field that to Yerzat on your behalf. And at the end, we're going to stick around for a bit of conversation as well. So hopefully we can, have a really good conversation about the messy side of AI products. So with that, I'll throw it to you, Yerzat. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, thanks, Ashley. Really good job on the pronunciation, by the way. Not a lot of people can do that. Hey, everyone. As mentioned, I promised to do this talk to Amir sometime in the summer, and of course now it's October, so I'm here. So today, bear with me for like 10 or 11 slides. I'll set up the context and the problem we were trying to solve with AI. Then we'll go into like the ideal implementation picture, and then I'll tell you how it really works, go through each step and the messy parts of each step, and then focus on a little bit of important things such as communication, cash flow, money, NPV, how to prove your system is better, how to be adaptable and persistent, and focusing on incremental improvements along the way. So to start things off, the use case I'm going to be covering is from Kazakhstan. It's in Central Asia, and this triangle here is my hometown of Almaty, and this dot here is where the mineral processing plant where the use case was done is located. It's about 700 kilometers, so 12 hours in the train or 12 hours by car. Not easy to get to, so I was physically distant from the end user, actually, for this one. Just to give you more context on what mining and metals is all about, you have these big dump trucks that take these big rocks and put them through a mineral processing plant, which then goes through a smelter and then somehow ends up in your iPhone. Today, we're going to be focused on mineral processing plants, and this is what they look like. And here on the left is actually a grinding mill. It's a big piece of machinery that grinds ore. This is what the workflow looks like in a simplified manner, and this black box is what the process we were trying to optimize was, the two-stage grinding process. Here we have the problem definition. So ore goes in, water goes in, you have steel balls that go in, everything gets mixed inside the mill. You have the stability parameters, the mill power, and the mill filling. Mill filling is basically how much material you have in the mill. And then you're monitoring the density of the slurry that comes out. And so the input are different flow rates, the lab test data, when the mill was last repaired. The main data is time series, and you have sensor measurements, and you have to make sure that the values are stable. The models we used for forecasting were deep neural networks, such as LSTMs. This was back in 2017. And we also used analytical models, physical-chemical models, to make sure the predictions were okay. So as you can imagine, the dual simulation part is kind of complicated. But one of the main things that we wanted to predict was what will happen in this window in the next 20 minutes. You need to make sure that the mill doesn't become too heavy, basically, because otherwise everything will go to hell. It looks pretty simple. However, the mineral processing plant runs 24/7. And why do you need domain experts is specifically for these things like this. For example, these are called PNID diagrams. If you're lucky, they are in some kind of PDF. If you're unlucky, actually right here, you have to look at paper and then figure out all the flows, because everything is interconnected. And you need to make sure that you're actually accurately simulating your process, and you're not only looking at an isolated time series data. So at the end of it all, you have these dashboards, and then you're predicting a single number, right? So in terms of the UX UI experience, let's say this end user here was an operator. So you're predicting a certain number, or in this case, the weight of the mill. So now what? Your prediction model, your complicated model, gave a number, but what does the operator need to do with it, right? You need to make sure that you're actually giving the user enough value and context around that number for them to make decisions on it, which means you need to do a lot of user training to effectively implement your model into the existing workflow. So also, one of the most important things to deliver value, again, this is within an enterprise environment, and you can actually replace mining with banking or healthcare or insurance. You'll need three critical pieces to deliver value. You'll need domain expertise, you'll need your data scientists, and also you'll need your software engineers. And all three of these together, they comprise an AI team. This is taught, I believe, in courses, and everybody knows this, but just like I mentioned, as you saw before, to be able to break down this complicated problem, you actually do need those three components. To be able to break down the problem, to give those predictions, and actually show those predictions in a very good UX UI experience. So you start a project, right? Ideal implementation looks like this. It's all neat, beautiful slides, PowerPoint. Phase one, phase two. Phase one, you do process analysis, you figure out the bottlenecks, you target the process. In phase two, ideally, you have the historical and real-time data. You analyze the process, you figure out if you have a platform, you're able to actually put historical data, analyze it, and actually do predictions on that historical data to be able to show like, hey, in the past 3 years, we would have been able to predict mill overloads in this case, for example. Then client says, okay, you deploy and you calibrate the models. After that, once you implemented them, you commission the models, you do some kind of a user acceptance test, right? And everything goes well, you roll it out, great. The POC is done, you sign a 3-year subscription deal, and you go into support mode, right? And this is the ideal project schedule, right? All clean and neat, starting, let's say, September 2018 and ending in May 2019, right? So that's what, 9 months or 10 months. For some of you, this might seem long, but I'll have to tell you that this is actually short. You actually have to budget even more time for that because each step has its own messy sides. So that was the ideal picture. Now, the reality is this is actually from, I guess, 2017. 85% of big data projects failed. 80% of AI projects will remain alchemy, right? How do you explain to people what your AI models do? Through 2022, 20% of analytic insights will deliver business outcome, 20% only. And it is a challenge for businesses. And this is what we'll be covering today with Ashley, like the messy parts that lead to these numbers. And one of the biggest things, if you come from the product management world, is everybody knows this. Like on the left is how the customer explained the situation to you, the problem, and to the right you go through like how different people and different stakeholders understand the problem and what you actually get in the end. But what he really wanted is just a wheel on a tree. So. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like this is a good spot to kind of just pause for a second and just kind of hear more about you. So you've kind of been talking a bit more about the ideal project, but like, how did you become involved in this? And then on top of that, like, how ready were you to take on this mess?
It's a good question. So it definitely helped that I worked for 5 years in a big mining and metals company. We were 50,000 people, like 16 mines, 4 processing plants, and 3 smelters, I believe. I ran a bunch of industrial automation projects. I did an initiative called Smart Mine, where in 2014 we're actually embarked on this like complex transformation initiative. And then at the end, I was able to do some ERP implementation. But yeah, just like you mentioned, started looking at Coursera, started like reading up, and just so happened that I found this AI startup out of UK that was actually looking to do a joint venture with the Kazakh government. And actually, that's one of the parts we can cover today. One of the different stakeholders you might encounter is actually the government and how they think. So I joined as a consultant at first. I was actually told like, we will have the joint venture up and running in a month or so. But when I joined, the prime minister changed, so everything had to be replanned and redone. And I didn't know what AI. Like I took the machine learning course by Andrew Ng, I think, the Math Lab on Octave. Well, that was back in 2016, so Octave. But I really didn't know what I was getting into. In terms of preparedness, I think the project management experience helped a lot, and also the fact that I studied systems engineering, and I was a little bit more prepared in terms of Coursera. But yeah, a lot of the stuff I had to figure out on the fly. I joined, and then 3 days later, they told me to do a demo of the software to the prime minister. I was like, oh, okay, great. Let me just learn this. And a lot of these things just happens. I guess you have a time box. You're like told in a week you have a presentation in front of 50 people. You're scared, but you do it anyways, and like the world doesn't end, right? So it's kind of like that.
Okay. Wow. Like a bit, I'm back there. Like, I feel like the one thing that I think you've seen a lot of, though, is this kind of instability in a way. It's like, okay, you're getting thrust into a complex situation, and hopefully, the people on the stream, as well as the people who would be going into this kind of thing, won't have that to kind of deal with on top of this. It also seems like the target audience isn't quite ready for such a huge disruption, and just asking for a presentation for the prime minister in 3 days, like the demo, like, my gosh, like that's a lot. Like, what readiness did you, well, I mean, I'll ask a question like this, like, how ready did you think the client was for AI before you actually, got there?
Yeah. Okay. So my task was actually, the first one was to get the joint venture off the ground. So I had to do two things. I actually had to get clients who were willing to say they would pay for the solution, or at least try it out. And in parallel, convince the government that they need to spend money on this, because it was a 50-50 deal, right? And so we ran the whole pre-sales sales pipeline. So I went out there, coming from mining, obviously, I went out through my contacts, all the companies. So, you target, let's say, 10 companies, right? You do pre-sales with all of them. The way we did it was we ran workshops, innovation workshops, right? So where in 2 to 3 hours, we would cover all of the details of our modeling, of our platform, what it does. We'd get people from a bunch of mining companies into the same room and would see what would stick. Also, we would go out to these, corporate headquarters, just find connections, try to get your way in, cold calling, whatever, cold emailing. You do the presentations, you have a deck. So that's one of the things, actually. Having standardized decks, standardized pitches, and standardized demos is very important, because when you actually later scale, well, first of all, it takes the brain power off, right? If you have the script, you're good. But also when you scale, it's also very important to know what your sales guys are pitching to the clients, right? You have to make sure that it's the right way. And it's a lot of trial and error. You have to gauge the room as well, depending on who you're pitching to, right? So this client I'm talking about, they were, I would say, in the middle of readiness. So they weren't paper-based, very 19th century mineral processing plant, which we still do have, maybe 20th century, but they were also not very advanced. The factory was, I think, 10 years old, and they were missing some key pieces of instrumentation that we were used to. But the way we actually got this deal was we got the president of the CEO of the company, right? We presented to him for 2 hours, actually, at first. And he was confused. That's one of the things. I have one of the slides later, but I can just talk about it now. You really have to know where you sit in terms of, in your industry. If you're doing an AI solution, you really have to know where you are, because each industry will have its own jargon, right? For mining, it's ERP, MES, SCADA, APC, and you really have to know what you're delivering, because the corporate, the enterprise people, they're so used to pitches, right? And their own IT teams and their own process automation, whatever teams, right? They show these beautiful, neat enterprise architectures, and they show these pyramids according to some standards. And whenever you're pitching, they tell you oh, so are you guys MES? Are you guys a process historian? Are you guys, they'll throw a bunch of stuff at you. And you really have to be careful, because if you say you are an APC solution, that means advanced process control. that means that they will compare you against the big guys like Emerson, Honeywell, GE, right? And you really don't want to be in that spot where it's like GE is a 100-year-old corporation, has been doing APC for 20 or 30 years now. And obviously, why would they go with you, this startup, right, that's been around for 5-6 years or whatever, and go with AI when they can just pay the same amount of money to GE and be kind of more sure that they will get back that investment. So yeah, he came in, we were explaining to him how we're able to predict what's going to happen to the process on a short-term basis. And apparently at the same time, there was this big company, it's called Dassault Systems. They have, actually Dassault is the parent company of SolidWorks, for people who know. They have a platform called Insight, and he was comparing us to them. He's like, okay, you guys are doing a data lake, right? Because one of the things you have to do is like you have to create, like, get all the data from the sensor, right? So he was saying, you guys are creating a data lake, so you guys are a competitor to Insight. No, we're not. Like, we had to explain to him for 2 hours that we are not, we are kind of unique. We're kind of unique in the world in the sense that, or there were maybe 5 or 6 companies doing it, right? And so we had to do 2 or 3 sessions, but we have to give him credit. He was really interested. And after the 2-hour presentation, he actually came in for a 4-hour more detailed deep dive into how models work, because we had several implementations in Chile, I believe. In Chile and South Africa. And we ran him through all the different models that we did for different use cases. And so he was really interested. He's like, yeah, okay, so these guys are innovating. Let's go. Let's do a pilot with these guys, right? So we got the CEO green light, but that doesn't mean like they're gonna let us in. So the next step was level below, right? You sit down with the CFO, the chief production officer, the chief innovation officer, the chief IT officer, and then you basically do the same presentation. Obviously, it helps if you get data beforehand, because yes, it's all well and good if you're presenting in a vacuum. This is what we did for somebody else. But one piece of advice I have is to get as much client data as possible early in the process. Like, when you are GE or Salesforce and you have been selling for however many years, right? You have this like all laid out process, and you can just stick that software in. I know it's not that easy, but it's like AI is very dependent on the data sets you're going to be working with, right? And as I mentioned, it's also very dependent on the context, on the workflows. So getting a hold of the client's real situation as early as possible is very beneficial, so that you can actually, ideally, you have a platform and you tell the client, hey, send me some CSVs or TSVs or whatever, right? Like historical data for 2 years. This is what we did. We asked them, send us 2 years worth of data, and we'll stick it into our platform, and we'll show you what would have happened if you ran algorithms back then. So using that, and also in parallel, you need to be asking questions about the business processes, about the financial metrics, right? You have to actually, because a lot of times the clients are going to be like, okay, AI, where am I going to put it? Tell me. And you're like, well, where does it hurt? And they're like, well, it hurts everywhere. Okay, fine. Let's look at the cost revenue breakdown. So we were able to get their financial, and then of course you have to understand that there's financial data and then there's accounting data. Well, in Kazakhstan, former USSR, they do financial accounting, managerial accounting, and there's like accounting. So you have to understand like which numbers even to take, and you have to run it through their corporate offices as well. Anytime you want to like put a financial model in front of the higher ups, you need to make sure that the client signs off on those numbers, right? So yeah, like that's the next step. You present in a corporate headquarters. Everybody says, okay, the president said okay, and this all looks good and well, but we need to do a pilot, like do a proof of concept, and of course it's for free. I mean, you would be lucky if they pay you, but if you're just starting out and whatever, you kind of have to just deal with it, right? If you're doing AI, again, we're doing pre-sales for like 5 clients at the same time, and you're lucky if one of them says yes to this POC, right? So,
you're probably also unlucky if 4 say yes.
But that's like a good unlucky, right? That's a good problem to have, rather than just 1 out of 5 says yes.
I've been taking so many notes here. I have a couple of hilarious quotes already written down. Like, put the AI where it hurts is awesome. Oh my gosh! Because I know what the next series of topics are, so I'm gonna just pause you for a second here because I have another question that I just have to ask. It's just like, you had to make a presentation to the Prime Minister and give like a demo to the Prime Minister like 3 days in. What kind of questions does the Prime Minister ask about AI?
That's a very good question. Yeah, it comes back to the point of like stakeholders, right? So you need to know what the person across from you, what his thinking is, right? So the Prime Minister or the President, these guys are running the country basically, and they're thinking in terms of strategic visions, 10, 20 years ahead. They're thinking of people, they're thinking of the whole country, right? So when I did the presentations to those guys, all of the questions were very high level. It didn't matter what the model was behind it. It didn't matter whether it was reinforcement learning or RNN or whatever. All that mattered was, how does this affect human capital? Like, how many people are you going to actually like train, right? If you're going to be implementing these solutions, is it going to replace people? Is it going to free up people, right? How much knowledge are you going to be bringing into the population? A lot of it was also tied to, they're thinking about big industries. So the way industries work in Kazakhstan, for example, it's like, we have a big oil and gas industry, which is run by several huge corporations that are closer to the state sometimes. And then we have several big mining corporations that are also close to the state. So these are GDP drivers. And so all of the questions are, how is it going to affect the GDP? How is this going to affect these industries, right? Like, will people lose jobs? No. Will you be able to bring everybody? Like, let's say there's 100 companies, right? How fast can you roll this out in 100 companies? Because they're like, you just gotta, if this works at one company, you need to give me a roadmap on a country level how this will work in whatever 10 years or whatnot. But also, there's a tendency nowadays that like each government has like a minister of innovation or minister of information, and those guys are more tactical, I would say. They're very good at knowing what the trends are, and what they want to do is bring in these global innovations into the country, right? So they'll be asking like, oh, this is a digital twin, right? So okay, are you actually able to? So we're trying to do a digital twin for a single process, and they're going, okay, so can you do the digital twin of the whole industry? I'm like, okay, wait, but it's not that simple. But in principle, yes. And then of course it comes back to the question of taxes, like how much money will this venture bring in terms of like taxes and whatever, because that's how they make money.
The question I have is like, who is helping you with this? Because at the end of the day, these are some like really, really strategic level perspectives that may not apply to everybody on the stream and everybody watching this video's kind of consideration set. But at the same time, it just goes to show that with the disruption like AI is going to bring, you're going to have to be able to talk at the strategic level. So with that background, like, who helped you get ready for these initial conversations to make sure you brought those perspectives to bear?
Yeah, so originally I was operating within this. We had this like innovation park is what we call it. It's like within a government, a separate body that is responsible for innovation. It's like the Ontario Centers of Excellence kind of thing. I don't know if you heard of them, where basically they're given money, they're given resources, and they like go back to the government and say, we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 initiatives. We need that much money, that much resource, and they operate this whole thing. And so I was getting help from them, but also a lot of help came from IntelliSense, which is the company out of UK that I worked with. So it was just us doing the thing.
I'm thinking on the fly, I can tell. My gosh.
Well, yeah. But you have to remember, like, those were okay. The most important and the hardest ones were with clients, right? Because that's when you have to think in terms of hard, cold cash, right? Like you have to figure out the and you can't just figure out, let's say, oh, I'm gonna increase revenue by 20%. You have to think about the net present value and the IRR and the ROI, right? And these corporations usually have their own financial models. So let's say in this mining case, you are targeting a process and you want to increase their throughput by 5%, right? Which is great. But the increase in throughput actually means you'll have to put in more materials. And there's an associated cost with all that increase, right? And they have their own accounting methods. And then you also have to take into the fact that there is a thing called TOC, total operating cost of the system over the lifetime, right? So they might have to incur costs in terms of buying servers, training people, all of that. So when you add it all up, sometimes the revenue looks good, but then the actual like profit or the NPV is low. So you have to go back to the drawing board and say, no, this process is not going to work. We need to figure out a different process, right? And again, like corporations have, ways to decide, enterprises, I guess, have ways to decide which projects will go and which projects will not go green, right? And then it's pretty simple at the high level. It's like if the NPV is above whatever level, we let the project go. We give it a green light. I remember in my enterprise, we had if the IRR was like less than 20%, I think, which means like, I think 5 years payback, we wouldn't let it go into production. Just didn't bother. Even though, might have been useful, no, didn't bother. No. It's like an extreme case, but in general, enterprises won't do stuff if you're not bringing more than 20%, like if you're not improving things by more than 20%, 15, 20%, they're not going to bother, because you have to like remember that this is change. AI, especially, is such a huge innovation that it will require a lot of changes, and they're just not going to bother. Like money is okay, costs are one thing, but also there's this whole transformational, right, cost, like human cost. You're going to have a lot of people stressing out. You're going to take away people's time, and they just won't bother if it's, not less than a certain number. This maybe 15%, I would say, probably 15, 20%. Obviously, if you're giving them 10x, that'd be great. But I have a good example. Like we tried doing reinforcement learning, and it was pretty cool. It was very neat. Like we set up the problem, defined the problem, got the data in, everything was good. It was a cool presentation demo, like there was a bunch of pumps and we set it up as a game of pumps. And then the algorithm was able, after 300 iterations, it was able to figure out the most efficient way. At the end of the day, gave like 5% improvement over a traditional PID control. So the client was like, not worth it. And also another story. So I did a conference talk on this, where I was so excited to present this, right? And most of the people in the audience were like business people, insurance, finance, whatever, banking. And I presented this reinforcement learning agent, and nobody cared. Well, I did. Not nobody cared. It was just like wrong audience. And you just have to always remember that the technical, if you're excited about the technical side of things, it might not be the case that the other person across the table is, right? Just have to.
It sounds like the conversation really changes the deeper and closer you get to the problem, right? And one of the things that's kind of, I've kind of stuck on here, which is that you can't just think of the problem you're trying to solve in isolation, that your solution will probably create other problems that you already need to have answers for, especially for this front end audience. So these people like the CEO, the Prime Minister, Prime Minister is thinking about taxes and human capital. The CEO is thinking about overall profitability and keeping the system alive. Then he's got his chiefs, or she's got her chiefs that are thinking about the various, call it, considerations of, what innovation means or what production in your case means. And they've also got their own viewpoints on what a successful project looks like. And that is still at the system level. Then you start getting into these deeper conversations, which are more about this technical stuff. And it sounds like you've got to have 4 or 5 different perspectives just to start getting your hands close enough to the problem itself. I don't see any questions in the chat so far, but I'll put it out to the audience. If you have any questions to this point here, put them into the chat, because I might, Yerzat, if it's okay with you, if you can just go through the next couple of slides I think you've got queued up, I think that'll situate us for the next little bit of a conversation here that I think you may have covered a little bit, but that might also give people a chance to kind of start thinking about some of the questions they may have and putting them into the chat. But why don't you just jump ahead a couple more as we continue the conversation?
Sure. Yeah. So the next set of slides is, me walking through each step of the of how to get to a successful project. And this is a standard sales pipeline. My lessons here are that you need to identify a champion early, and you need to ask for resources. The idea is that corporations might have these innovation officers, but you really want somebody closer to the end user, somebody closer to the end problem that you're going to be solving. And as I mentioned, you need to get the data and the context early to be able to clean that data for whatever algorithm you're going to run it on. Again, you need to analyze the stakeholders and the users. What do the different stakeholders and users want, right? Because that will depend on what your pitches and presentations will look like for different people. And again, defining this business and the technical problem is actually very hard sometimes, so that you're actually able to solve it with AI, right? In Kaggle data sets, you get clean data, you have a defined problem, but in an enterprise environment, you actually don't have that. And you might get pulled in different directions by different departments to actually, they will want you to solve different problems for them. But you actually have to remember that the biggest value you bring will be judged by the NPV calculations, right? And then you define a KPI, and then you try not to overpromise to get the deal done. You actually need to align your technical and sales teams on the same page. You actually don't want your pre-sales or sales people going out there and selling something that will not, your technical team will be able not to deliver, right? And then, it really helps to get all the fundamentals right in the beginning, like the financial fundamentals. And also very important, you need to allocate a lot of, if the client lets you, of course, you need to allocate a lot of time, a lot of buffers, because there's a lot of risks with AI, and you really want to have that schedule stretched out as far as possible. One of the cool...
Can I just jump in there very quickly? Can you go back one slide? I got a bunch of questions in the chat right now.
Of course.
Amir has a question. It's almost a statement, but he says, but most companies are not willing to show you data before you prove value, which is chicken and egg. No?
Yes, it is. It is the chicken and egg. And yes. So if you can, you have to push for that data. You tell them, let's sign an NDA, because you need to tell them hey, if you want this project to succeed, it again goes back to communication. You need to over-communicate and explain to the person on the other side that the success of the project will depend on how well you understand the data. And so if you're able to communicate at the highest level, because like these kind of decisions, giving you the data before the project starts, can be only decided on the higher levels, right? You tell them, okay, let's sign an NDA, let's sign a memorandum, where basically legally they'll be covered in terms of the data confidentiality, and that's how you need to push the conversation. If not, well, you just sort of take the risk, allocate time in your schedule to deal with the risk. Brainstorm with your team how you're going to be able to dealing with it. Look at analogs, whatever, and go blind, I guess. Yeah, I mean, there is no silver bullet, really. You have to you have to adapt to the situation, basically.
Yeah, I like that. I love that statement, which is the success will depend on how well you understand the data, and their ability to translate that understanding to you, as well as you to have enough time with it, will increase the probability of success. Zach has a great question in the chat here as well. So did you have to change your product during pre-sales to fit the needs of different customers? Were there customizations, and if so, how were they done? So first question, did you have to change your product during pre-sales to fit the needs of the different customers? And then the second one, were there customizations, and if so, how were they done?
It's a good question. So this is a point where the company is probably 7 years old. So we had maybe 4 or 5 implementations, and we had 4 or 5 processes that we were pretty good at. But we also had some research done on different processes that we just research, right? Like we were kind of confident, but we didn't actually implement stuff. And with AI, and especially in the manufacturing or whatever domain, it's not going to be one-to-one from model to from plant to plant. So we did have to do a lot of customization for this use case specifically, because the models we used, we were trying them out basically in the field for the first time. But even for models that we could have reused, because the equipment can be 1,000 different pieces, like one thickener or one mill will have 1,000 different variations. You have to just kind of account for that. But on the high level, though, like if you go on the high level, there are some pieces that you can reuse. I know that answer is like kind of complicated, but with AI, yeah, we had to customize a lot, and a lot of it depended on the sensors the client had, on the equipment the client had, how willing the client was actually to spend money. Because the first thing we would do is say, okay, our model is able to deliver value if you put in more sensors. And then we do the calculation, and then the client would say, of course, yeah, no, you have to prove without the sensors. But sometimes they agreed to do it. So, yeah, yes and no.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have to have a bit of flexibility in your implementation. I think that's likely to be common for the majority of the early use cases of AI anyway, that they're very human-centric, and humans are different everywhere. So it is what it is. Now, that's likely to be the case, and I guess your challenge on that side is also to be able to factor that in. As well, that like if your model doesn't necessarily translate well between implementation, you're likely going to have to factor that in as well for subsequent implementations, because you're now going to think, okay, now I've got to retrain again, I've got to get more data again, I've got to do all this extra customization. So planning for it to have a bit of an OpEx hit every single time to your bottom line as an AI company to move between customers is something you're going to have to put in as a line item in your spreadsheet. I really like this question that he has as well. So how do you figure out the enterprise portfolios, their IRR, and what competing projects they have that you're essentially going up against at the end of the day? They're weighing the value you're bringing against somebody else's new mill. Like they're probably. So how did you find out what that information, their enterprise portfolios and their IRR, and what competition you were up against?
Yeah, so it's actually one of the most important probably learnings and pieces of advice I can give is the communication and people. So I mentioned earlier that you need to get a champion as early as possible. So just through that, you communicate and you find out through the people who are on your side within the enterprise, all of their policies, all of their like regulations, all of their inner workings, because they will be able to like guide you and tell you what exactly you need to do to be able to have a higher success of like getting a contract, right? Because again, it's like a win-win situation. Like if they're able to get you in and you actually deliver value, they're able to advance in the organization. In terms of comparing yourself to, and yeah, okay, so the portfolio, like the IRRs, yeah, you just like get your champion to talk to the finance people and like get those numbers, right? Or, if they're talking to the CEO, they already know like how to get projects past the investment board, investment committee, or whatever they have set up. In terms of like competition now, you really need to think about, like, you need to do the research. You need to know the space you're operating in. So you need to know the jargon for sure. Like if it's insurance, if it's banking, you better know what an enterprise architecture for a bank looks like. You need to know what the front facing, the middle office, the back office, where you actually would fit. You need to basically, whenever you walk into the client, right, and the farther you progress in the project, the more time you'll spend inside the client's company, and you need to be able to be like one of their own, right? So first thing is like knowing the industry, and then the second thing, knowing the industry, knowing the domain, like if it's IT or process control in my case, and then you also like, once you learn all of their processes and all the people, you just need to be one of their own, basically. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That once again, like that's like a really, really powerful set of guidance to somebody getting in here, just to make sure that they've got that full stack understanding. Zach goes a little bit further here. He says, do you have a process to define your champion? What kind of guidance could you give to Zach in picking a champion or identifying that champion to help you, navigate this organizational complexity?
This is very interesting. The best way is through personal connections, but if not, then you go on LinkedIn, you ask for some time, on a one-on-one, and through like LinkedIn, you can actually on LinkedIn, I think, and through company websites, you can figure out like the whole hierarchical structure of the enterprise and who makes decisions or whatnot. Because like this might sound salesy and whatnot. At the end of the day, though, if you're spending a lot of your time pitching to somebody who is not able to make the decision or get you closer to that decision, it's like waste of your time, right? Like this is one of the hard lessons that I learned was I'd be like so excited about some of the prospects, right? Like, my former company where I came from, for example, right? They'd call me up and say, "Hey, Yerzat, like, this is a really cool thing you're doing, right? We need some slide decks because we have a presentation to the chairman or whatever, right?" And I'd be so excited, like, "Oh, this is the breaker, right?" And then I'd spend some time doing the slides, send it over, and then they would look good doing their presentation, but then everybody like would kind of forget it. Like you have to just sort of filter those. And at some point in the sales process, you just have to say no to the clients who will not pay. The process for figuring out champions, networking, LinkedIn, outreach. But again, you have to be like, enterprise is very tough, and you need to be from the domain. You need to speak the lingo. You need to know the problems. I have like slides later on that, but that's fine.
So I really like that answer. So yeah, know your industry, know your domain, know the problems that you should know where you're going to be able to play. And then I also think that a key question or the key answer to that that question is know where the power is in the organization and know where, if you focus on them, you can actually get stuff done. So in certain organizations, it's very top down, and therefore, the president, the CEO, somebody at that chief level is likely going to be able to help you break down the barriers. In some other organizations that are way more flat, and innovation is rewarded, you got to find that person who is incentivized to help you, and just get those first series of meetings and start getting that institutional momentum that you can get out of developing that network inside the company. Whereas it's a little bit different when you're going top down. So I have one or two more, and then I think we can keep moving. So Zach has a follow-up on the customization question. So his earlier question was, did you have to customize per client? But on a similar kind of vein, have you considered not following up if the client has scope creep during pre-sales? So it's like you've sold them one thing, and there's a bit of customization you're going to have to apply, but now there's additional scope creep, or they tacked on more scope to the problem you're trying to solve. Like, how do you go about either following up or trying to take the project in a different direction? Maybe it's just not worth it.
He said pre-sales, right? I mean, scope creep during pre-sales is great because you can get partners. You can ask for more money, right? Scope creep when you sign a contract, like a fixed sum contract, and it's creeping up, that's a big problem. And that's one answer, is to just say no to all those requirements. But during pre-sales, it's a good problem to have. Why not? Let them throw more problems at you. And if you don't know how to solve them, find partners. I don't know. Try to solve it. But I think Zach was mentioning scope creep during the project, and so with this one, it's actually pretty simple. There's a lot of, I think the project management body of knowledge is 1,000 pages. Agile has tons of literature. So AI projects, they're innovation projects, and then most of the time they're also become IT projects. I know this probably doesn't sound well to a lot of people, but the project management basics don't change. You need to fix the scope early on. You need to fix the budget, scope, budget, timeline, quality, control the risks, mitigate the risks. Especially if you're dealing with an enterprise client, it means you'll be dealing with a lot of lawyers after the pre-sales. So when there's a contract on the table and it has a fixed date and a fixed sum, and you're not, if you run into problems, you need to document those problems. If you're getting more requirements, you need to have a formal change request process in place, because it's very hard at the end of the day. If you don't deliver by the end date of the contract, or whatever the milestone you promise you don't deliver, it will be very hard to prove that it wasn't your fault. So even though you still want to give value, and this client, you want to please them, this is a formal relationship. Once you sign the contract, and you need to be able to keep the customer in line as well. Because let's say you budget 3 days for a data request, and let's say you didn't put it into the contract, that what happens if they don't give you the data request in 3 days? What are you going to tell the CEO at the milestone meeting, right? They didn't give me the data. He's going to say, well, why didn't you guys give me the data? Oh, he sent us the request. We were too busy, and you're not able to prove anything. At the end of the day, it's your word against theirs. And if there's no backup legal or legal framework for that, they'll choose their own people. So yeah,
that's something I don't think we talk enough about, is not only being able to predict your own performance as an AI product developer, but and therefore be able to give somebody a date. That's not always easy to do, but also talk through the more messy parts of the legal side of things that give both sides some defensibility when it comes to delivery. The government, the company that you're working with is likely to defend themselves against, some form of breach, right? So you didn't provide the value that you said you were going to provide. And then, like you said just a minute ago, right, they're going to take their own person. They're going to defend their own more likely than they are to defend yourself. And you're going to use the lawyer to make sure that you've also got some defensibility on your side when the client isn't coming to the table the way they need to, because you said it, I think, that very, very early quote, right? Which is, the success of your project is largely defined by how well you as the AI product team understand the data. And if there are things going to impair your ability to do that, it's very, 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 very difficult for this thing to be successful on both sides. And this is an investment. And the other thing that would really, really suck, I think, on the company side is if you have a flawed implementation, not because either party, had, a material breach. So it was just a misunderstanding somewhere. Because think about the disruption that is not only to the humans in here, but the systems that are at play to deliver value. A flawed implementation could have a serious impact. And therefore, you might even want some insurance. I know you would definitely want some insurance, especially when you're making these really big changes. Is that something you've ever had to deal with?
So in terms of like insurance or what, or flawed implementation?
I would say maybe touch on anything that really resonated there. Flawed implementation, insurance, legal, like anything there that you think is like, yeah, I really should tell people about that, because if they're getting into this one, there's a dragon there that they should know about.
Yeah, legal is so let's say you did the pre-sales, you sold your solution, right? And somebody tells you, okay, great, let's do this. Let's just sign a contract. But then you go to the lawyers, you're like, yeah, let's do this. And they're like, no, you have to go through the tender bid. Oh, great. So we have to deal with procurement. So you deal with procurement. If you're lucky, you're able to prove you're unique and nobody else has your solution. On the other hand, most likely there will be competitors who will say, oh, we have the same things, or we can do whatever these guys are telling you, but with a different system, with a simpler system, right? And you just have to, make sure that you're giving it your best to not lose the process. Hopefully, like the champion will be able to guide you through a normal process, like they might just do like a purchase order or whatever, and then you have to deal with legal. So yeah, there are actually, if it's a two-step process, when you're doing a POC, like a proof of concept, that has a whole set of problems with it, because it's like, okay, what are you guys delivering? And you might actually not deliver what you're saying because this is a proof of concept. You might want to put in a clause. Let's say if the POC is successful, then you go automatically into a subscription agreement, right, for 3 years. Well, then if your each year subscription is like $300,000 and it's $1 million contract, the whole value of the contract is over some kind of range, which means it probably have to go through a different process than if it was just a 300,000 or 100,000 POC deal, right? And then lawyers will go through. They'll tell you, okay, send us your template, your enterprise service agreement. They'll make sure that the data confidentiality, all of their interests are protected. You have to make sure your interests are protected. You meet in the middle. After maybe 1, 2, 3 months back and forth, you're exhausted, and then finally you sign the contract, and now you can actually go and talk to the users. Start the implementation, right? And sometimes you just have to, sometimes in like, this probably, I don't know, this is what happened to me. A lot of times I actually had to go to the client's offices and like run around with the paper to fast forward the process. Like go from one department to another to get their sign-offs, because they were not talking to each other. Like legal doesn't talk to finance. I don't know, because there was a big meeting last week and they got into a heated argument and now they're not talking. But you really need that contract signed. What are you going to do, right? So you go back and forth. You try to figure out a way to solve all of these problems. sometimes the stuff that lawyers want you to change affects your technical delivery. So you actually like have to go back to your office, talk to the team. So there's a lot of like back and forth running around. And then you sign the deal. It's like, oh, finally. But then you have to start implementing, right?
And I'm just looking at your slides here. So if you go like 2 ahead, I think this is exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Is that like
Yes.
point 1, be prepared for hell. I love it.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like what you're really painting a picture here is a story of upfront persistence to make sure that you've actually created a deal that you could be happy about. And I feel like one of the things that like what you're kind of explaining to us here is that like as a startup trying to sell an AI solution into enterprise, like have somebody who's done enterprise stuff before, or at least be ready to learn it really, really, really quickly, because it's not going to be fun, especially at the front end of this, because as a startup as well, you're usually burning money. Right? Like you don't have that many opportunities to get this right. And therefore, like this is something that you're going to have to be okay with. I really like the thing, allocate a lot of time in the schedule. That's essentially the second time you said this, that like, this is not going to happen on the level of urgency that you would like in most cases. And therefore, you know, plan for that as part of your overall delivery of this solution. Any other thoughts before we move forward? I don't really see any directly related questions. There are some good ones that I might just pause until the end, but is there anything else you wanted to kind of talk about on procurement and contracting before we keep moving?
No, that's it. I think for now, yeah.
Cool. All right, let's keep going. I love this, by the way. I think this is really, really great because you're really opening people's eyes, I bet, when I'm
not able to see the numbers of the questions. I don't know how many people are like listening in, but yeah, I'm enjoying this too.
Keep it coming. Thank you.
All right. So next slide, I guess, or
just keep going. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, let's say you finally got through legal. Now you actually have to implement, right? And this is the like high-level view of the platform that we were doing. You know, simple. You have your data sources. You have some kind of a mapping and data quality steps in it, and then you have a data lake or some databases, and then you're able to create your models on top of it, and then actually give your decisions, forecasts, classifications, whatnot. So during implementation, it's very important to remove roadblocks from the team, right? So you need to talk to the users like a lot, because you'll be getting data that is not clean, that is sitting there without context, and you really need to get all of those workflows around the data. What does it actually mean? You know, sometimes you might get weird data and you need to go to the users and ask them what happened on that certain date or whatever. You need to set up the platform, right? You need to, like, if it's an on-premise, and you need to get the hardware. If it's a hybrid or a cloud, you know, you need to make sure that you got your hosting provider, that the client's okay. Talk to users again. You need to set up the validation at this point. So a lot of times, you know, if you're running a deep learning model, you as a developer can't even sometimes explain what it's doing other than what it's predicting, right? But imagine you're on the other side and you're buying this model, right? And this guy comes to you and says, "Oh, here, look, it predicted this number. This is what's going to happen to the process in 20 minutes." You're going to be like, why is it doing that? What's the reason? Show me the factors. And you can show them the feature importance and all that. But at the end of the day, you just, you know, you kind of have to admit this is, you know, it's learning a mapping function. And it's like a bunch of matrices and just learning it. And you can do SHAP and the interpretability and explainability. But the way to get around this is to set up that validation. So the way we used to do it is, you agree a set of metrics in a certain period of time, where you either compare your solution to an existing solution, right? Because they will have something. Or if they don't, you agree with them a set of metrics. So in this case, we agreed with the client that they'll be tracking the predictions and seeing what happened on a parallel process. So they were actually like a couple of identical processes set up, and then we were actually able, we were kind of lucky that way. We're able to run a validation process on one process and see what happened to the other process, right? I mean, it has its own drawbacks, but that's just the way it is. And so after that period, if once you're able to prove that your solution is better, because the proof is in the numbers, right? And actually, you need to make sure through your UX and your UI that you can give the user as much explainability as possible. And this goes beyond mining ML. I think this is for every industry, right? Like doctors, when you're talking about AI for doctors, they need to be able to see why the algorithm made the decision it made, right? And in insurance and banking, whenever you're dealing with decision systems, you need to be able to explain or to show some kind of explainability to the end user, right? In my case, it's an operator that's looking at these graphs, that looking at these time series, and he needs to make a decision, like sometimes real time, because there are automatic feedback loops which do the set points, but they won't let you go into the feedback loop right away, right? You have to prove that it works. And then the operator needs to be able to be, like, he needs to be confident in the fact that if he sets a set point according to the recommendation that our algorithm gave him, like, it's not going to break the process, right? And the way to do that is to have the process run for a continuous amount of time and make sure that it doesn't break. Yeah, so again, I said talk to users twice here and figure out what is valuable, because this is very important. Like, validation runs are also, so a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, it's actually it will depend on the situation. You have to understand this. You have to think on your own feet. Validation is great, but going by pure numbers is also very risky. So you have to make sure that when they give you that time to implement your solution, you actually get the users hooked, right? So you actually get your end users and whoever else. So I don't know if I mentioned this, but one of the cool things that we found out, we actually didn't know this would happen. So this processing plant, right, it was a closed system, because this is an industrial system run by Schneider Electric, right? Schneider Electric software. And what these big guys usually do is they sell off one-off licenses, and based on the number of tags, they have a certain price. And so back in the day, like 5 years ago, what happened was, if you wanted to get the data online into the internet, you had to pay these guys for a separate module, right? We come in, we do a hybrid approach, where basically we're doing on-prem training, but also putting models in the cloud to be able to retrain. And now all of a sudden, everybody at the mine and the mineral processing plant has access to the data 24/7 through a web browser. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to them, because they're like, okay, you have to remember that this is 24/7. And usually it's 8-hour shifts, 3 8-hour shifts. For operators, it's 2 12-hour shifts. And so whenever mine management or management of the plant goes home, if they're not able to see their plant data online, it's a big problem. And like, this client didn't have it. They'd get a call in the middle of the night, something's broken, they have to get up, put on clothes, and go to the factory. Whereas now they can just like mitigate stuff. It was just one of the side effect. Like, they were more excited about the fact that they'll be able to see the data 24/7 and set up different widgets and dashboards, than they were excited about like this prediction part, right? You're spending so much time on the prediction part and all that, but the end user is excited about something else, totally different. It's actually one of the good points I learned from Amir's workshop course in the summer. It's like you just put the software in front of the user and observe them.
I feel like the thing that you also hit on here was not only to allow yourself to see opportunities for peripheral value, and you're going to put your project management hat back on and be like, wait, I'm adding, value here where I wasn't paid to do so. So I'm gonna have to change the scope in a way. So therefore, like, that's okay. But you're, like you said, right? Like, I want to make the customer happy. I really liked what you were saying there about identifying whatever it is going to get them hooked. Because to your point, having a thing that is going to help you make decisions or practically make decisions on your behalf means that you have to trust it. You have to be okay with, like you said, this thing could brick the mill. And if that happens, then I'm putting my job on the line. I'm really, really trusting, these new people that I've never seen before that speak a different language with my job. Like, take me through one of those conversations. Take me through like how that was going when it was actually happening real time. Maybe even like take me through the first conversation. You've got this guy with a hard hat on that's like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, I might skip a couple of slides because I wanted to show that picture. Is that right?
Go for it.
So yeah, this is what the presentation was in the beginning. So once you're past corporate, once I was past corporate, I had to get on a train or get in a car, drive down to the plant, and everybody is there, right? Waiting for me to deliver this. There's this buzz happening because they heard from corporate that all of this exciting stuff is happening, right? So everybody's there, management, everyone, like even all the departments that are not going to be affected. But you run them through the presentation. You try to explain as much as possible. You answer their questions, and then you sit down. You go into the actual. I don't know where it is. Oh, here. This is the operator room. You go to the operator room and you see what your users are doing. You watch them for however many hours you need to watch them, get all the data. You talk to them and figure out what are their pain points, what is it that they have to deal with on a constant basis, and you have to adjust your solution according to their needs. And you set the software in front of them, and then you walk them through it. You watch them interact with it, configure it if you need to, if something's stressing them out, right? It's like a standard IT approach. Like you train the users, then you watch them interact with it in the field, and then you make the adjustments. This is actually, like, on the left is an ideal operator's room, and on the right is what you will get in real life sometimes, because a lot of it is on paper, like all of these screens, a lot of stuff happening. There's also a lot of noise, and this is just a very harsh environment. Very, very hard to focus and think actually in those kind of conditions. But those are all of the things you have to realize your users are going through when you're putting your solution in front of them. It most likely needs to be simple, straight to the point, and everything else you explain outside in workshops and trainings and all that stuff.
But so let's just say okay, first off, were you wearing the same uniforms as these people?
Yes, of course. Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. Yeah. You have to, if you're in a manufacturing environment or mining, whenever you go into a dangerous zone, you have to wear a hard hat, you have to wear the uniform, and you have to wear the mask. Because
So I think that's actually pretty good guidance to anybody watching the messy side of AI products live stream or the video. You gotta look like your users when you're in there studying them. At the end of the day, otherwise they're going to be looking over their shoulders the entire time, and they're likely going to throw off your data, or something is not going to work exactly the same way you'd like. I really like that really, really blending in is going to be part of this. But take me through these initial interactions. So you're in this control room, and they're interacting with this, was there anything that like immediately stood out as like, oh my gosh, what have we done? Or like, what was that first set of experiences like?
Yeah, actually, yeah, hold on. Sorry, 1 second. So this stuff here was actually the actual like dashboards right there that we used. And so before actually going to talking to the users, like we would use our previous experience and have these dashboards set up. Actually, one good piece of advice: try to make the UI as customizable as possible. So like dashboards, way to go, so that at some point in the future you train your users and then they're able to set up their own dashboards however they like. But yeah, like we would like set up the dashboards, and this is all very time series, and I know like they're used to it most of the time, but one thing I learned was that they would be looking at this and saying, oh no, this is too much information. So what we ended up doing is just to have as less, like the least amount of numbers as possible. Just the most crucial part that the operator needs to do his job. Because the operator is operating by a simple set of rules, and we actually had to figure out the workflow and figure out all of the rules that he was following to be able to give them the recommendations. And all the other complicated stuff is actually for the engineers, because they're in the plant there are engineers whose job it is to like look at graphs and do analysis and figure out enhancement improvements and things like that. And things like this are also good, just visuals. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think that just kind of makes you realize as well, like as an AI product person, plan to have not only I love that point about like very flexible user interface, and have a system that you can reconfigure to suit your user need, but also know that you're likely going to have different viewers of this. You've got the frontline worker, the person who's immediately connected to it, that is going to have a view of decision support and this capability. But then there's someone else who's wanting to see the overall trends and graphs, and there's someone even higher than that that's saying, show me the dollars, figure out how this thing translates into value for me. So having some degree of forethought into that to say, okay, this thing needs to have an ability for us to present information at multiple levels. And that is also based on what you were saying earlier, that stakeholder breakdown of understanding not only who your user is, but the broader customer audience that is connected to it. I think that's really, really great guidance. Anything else on this? I really like your content on the other idea that you put out there as well, which was try and take your POC and connect it directly to your subscription deal, so that way you can kind of string this stuff together a little bit more nicely, and you don't spend a lot of money on POCs. Like there is a graveyard full of startups that gave away too much free stuff at the front end and didn't actually enable this bridge to happen. So let's talk through that a little bit. Take us through this getting the deal kind of part.
Yeah. So usually you do the POC, and then at some point in the middle, or whenever you think things are going, you actually start talking again, communicating with your champion or whoever. And if you actually have users that are backing you up, right, they're saying the software is great. The most important part is like users need to say the software is great. Because most of the time, they'll call the mine manager and whatever, and they'll say, "Hey, are you guys using it? Is it helpful?" So make sure you're bringing value, even though maybe you're not doing so well in the validation. But if you have both, it's great. So start communicating early. Start talking about the ARR. So this is one of the things we encountered was that the company was actually still used to the old way of like doing one-off deals. And I think a lot of enterprises still are, right? Like they're used to just buying the license and owning the software, right? And now you're saying, well, no, actually, we need to do a 3-year deal, subscription, right? And they're like, oh, what does that mean exactly? What are you going to do with our data? Let's say in year 2 we're unhappy. What do we do, right? So you go through all of these back and forth, and then there's another thing you need to worry about is when you sign the ESA, the Enterprise Service Agreement. Support is something that you have to think about early on. Well, not too early, but at this point for sure. In this case, because it's manufacturing, it's 24/7. So you need to have your L0, L1, L2, L3 be able to respond as fast as possible, right? You need to think about the confidentiality, the data access. One of the constraints we had, for example, was the data could not leave the country. So because this was mining data, it's considered a natural resource, right? So it's confidential to the government. We were not allowed to use any kind of data center outside of Kazakhstan. So we had to use a data center inside of Kazakhstan. It's a funny story with that one, actually. We were running the POC, and one of the our data center that we chose, we lost the data at some point. Apparently, there was construction being done, and somebody ripped the fiber optic cable that was going into the data center, and then we lost data for 3 days. So I had to explain to but this was a POC, right? So it's all good. You need to make sure that the support level and all of the pieces in between you and the client, your data center, your the way you set up your architecture, your servers, everything is on the right level of redundancy and safety and whatever. So you're able to bring up those. If they tell you we need gold level environment, you need to actually be able to deliver that. However, the most important part is that things change in the business. Any business changes. Any business wants to move forward, which means in this case, the factory grew bigger. There was more equipment added, equipment replaced, sensors broke down. So all of that affects your distribution, your data, right? So you need to know how you're going to be doing, first of all, model retraining based on longer term changes, but you also need to have your models be robust, where if one sensor breaks and you're not getting any more data in, you have to architect for that case specifically. I believe it was Andrew Ang, he was saying something similar in one of the podcasts. He was saying, they chop down a tree outside of a factory and the light changes and your vision algorithms all go haywire. So you need to think of all of those things when you're doing this. But of course, the biggest change is to sign this long-term deal, to actually tell the client, you guys are going to be with us for 3 years, right? Because you want that subscription, because you want to be valued at a higher margin. And then at the end of it all, you have to remember that you have not designed a solution so custom that you can't go and sell it to other people. So, yeah, and negotiating is you start with 5 years. They tell you 1 year, and hopefully you're able to get down to 3.
Yeah, but I feel like what you've also outlined here is not only is there a certain level of maturity that applies when selling to enterprise level clients, but you need to have thought about this ahead of time, and this needs to be baked into your original sales pitch, because these aren't cheap things at all. Like a 24/7 support center means that you've always got, likely an initial support person ready to answer the phone, and then, or, chat. I don't know how you do support. Like mining support, I bet is a little bit different, because you probably have, an account manager of sorts that gets the phone call. I mean, not even been you. But I get you're going to have to think through support. And then on top of that, you've got to think through, okay, I really like what you were saying there about resilience, that this machine needs to be able to tolerate changes in its sensor information. It also needs to be able to it needs to also be able to tolerate changes in the business environment. So you were saying earlier, right, is that like as the thing scales, as the factory scales, if you're selling to call centers, as the call centers scale, as the volume of payments that you're classifying for fraud scale, how do you? I feel like staying in that conversation is also a really big thing, and know that that's where this business might go when you first start these conversations, because this is an expensive proposition. To get this line item wrong might completely break the value of the deal, and then you're paying for lawyers to get back out of it. So it's not cheap to get in, it's probably not cheap to get out. But I also don't think I want to make sure we aren't scaring everybody away from.
Oh yeah, of course.
like I even though there are the messy sides and the scary sides, let's not kind of tell people not to do it. Just because the economics of SaaS don't necessarily apply to the AI style company, it doesn't mean that it's not hideously valuable, and it is not that it's not something that is actually good to get into.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you have to like realize that the even though it's complicated and hard and all, it's still very interesting because you are delivering something that probably nobody else has. Well, very few people have delivered, right? So you just have to keep pushing and keep going, keep learning. Problems come your way, just keep going.
Yeah, but like I also feel like this is defensibility. So think about if you've actually gotten through these gates. These are now not only ability for you to sell into other customers, because yes, training is expensive. Yes, all this other stuff that you're going to have to do, to populate with sensors, like to set it all up is expensive and figure it out. But hopefully it's not just the model you're selling, it's the solution. And therefore, like that is hard to emulate if you're a competitor. It's not going to be that easy for you to spin up a new relationship or for somebody else to come in and displace you, because they've already made a really big investment. So I feel like that I also want to say is really, really, really good to get right early. And it's you're never going to get it right, but you're going to get it as good as you possibly can. And then the earlier better. And therefore, people on the call or on the stream or, on watching the video later, like don't be afraid that, these are all the hurdles you need to get over, because they're all programmed system level defensibility to a really, really, really strong long-term business arrangement. Like a 3-year contract, that's amazing. A 5-year contract is amazing. Think about the world of software as a service where, oh my gosh, I got a month or I got 2 months, and then my retention, I'm hoping to get people to stick around for 6 months, and I'm getting $1 here, $20 a month. AI is a completely different economic idea and an economic business. I noticed a little farther down, you also have some conversations around business. But is there anything else on this that you would like to get into, on the messy side? Like, was there anything that you kind of got surprised by?
Not that I can think of. Maybe no, not yet.
And anybody on the call, if you have any other thoughts, or on the chat, if you have any thoughts about this here, because at the end of the day, we're a team. We're going to try and all learn from each other as this pertains. But I can only imagine what it's like. Supporting an AI solution also requires a different level of support, a different kind of team, probably, to solve the problems. And therefore, there aren't an unlimited number of people that actually can maintain and keep this thing alive.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not saying all of this to scare people away, I guess. It's just things that you don't really hear that much when you read Medium or watch YouTube talks or, go through Coursera classes and whatnot. And I was really surprised because, that's a good question. What was I surprised by? The amount of non-AI work that I had to do to get this over the line. You know what I mean? maybe the amount of time we actually spent on model development and like getting the models to work, 20-30% max. Everything else was, running around, talking to people, communication within the team, to the client. It's also, also very good, I guess, because it's just a human element, right? Also, there was an additional complication that my users were 700 kilometers away. So I really had to make sure that when I go down there for 2 weeks and spend the time with them, I had all my questions written down. I had all my information that I needed to get back to the team, because a lot of the stuff was like on paper, somewhere hidden in the room or whatever, or in somebody's head, right? So, but it is exciting work. It is exciting at the end of the day, honestly.
I had a question from before, which was around SLAs. So when you were defining your SLAs, like what were you thinking about here? Now, mine is probably a little bit different than other systems, but like, what are kind of the inputs you brought in when you were thinking about how to define, how to support this, and what levels were, what did you that report? Like, what's crucial? What amounts to a major incident? What amounts to like something minor you can forget about and come back to it later?
Yeah, that's a good point. The worst thing that we were thinking about that could have happened was if we lost the predictions, and then we had to figure out where in the pipeline, because this was microservices, where this would happen. And so if we actually had to go down on-prem and fix it at the plant, right? Because that to get predictions, you have to, right now, this was also 3 years ago, like before like ML end-to-end, whatever was popular. And so, you lose a prediction, and then you just have to get everybody up and figure out where in the pipeline everything broke. Hopefully you figure it out and fix it before the client is too upset. But that's I guess it's not different in any way other than any kind of SLA when you do with an IT system. But the added complication of the ML pipeline is the hardest part. Yeah, the worst would be like a level 3 or level 4 when your top head of ML would have to actually go and like find the problem. So that was the complication, I guess, with regards to the SLAs. There was a thought in my mind, but it slipped, so we'll just let it go for now.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll jump back in from the ether. I have a question in the chat from Mr. McDonald 911. Hey, Yerzat, great talk so far. Do you think an AI-centered B2C solution, so B2C, not B2B, would lead to a substantially different experience? And he in brackets wrote entrepreneurship experience. So I think the question here is like B2C versus B2B, substantially different, and how?
It's a good question. I guess it depends. Maybe I'll start with commonalities. The commonalities are, at the end of the day, you have to figure out value for the user. And a lot of times that prediction or the classification needs to be put in context, and you need to find that hook early on. With B2C, I guess it's, you can set up experiments, validations, like put it out there, right? I think with enterprise, so one of the funny and interesting things is people, like companies like SAP or IFS or Oracle, when they're doing their enterprise deals, like you would be amazed at the amount of money, for example, that is sitting in just maintenance. Like a maintenance license for a top tier solution can be like $5,000 per license if it's, I don't know, if you're buying it for like 100 users for an enterprise, right? So the customer acquisition cost, can be higher because the lifetime value of the customer is much higher. And also, you would be amazed at some of the things that happen. Like my previous company that I did, the mining and metals company, we ran through 5 ERP solutions for maintenance while I was there. And at some point, because what happened is like a new guy comes in, technical director, he's used to running some other platform. He brings them in, just puts it in and tells everybody to use it and just throws everything, all the old stuff out. So this happened several times. And one of the interesting things was that accounting at some point was sitting, there were 1,100 licenses, which is one mine basically of people in maintenance licenses, just sitting on books, and accounting didn't know how to write them off because these were bought as CAPEX. And obviously once, 5 years or 10 years passes, you have to write them off. So who's going to take the hit? And none of the mines wanted to take the hit, but these were licenses. Like this was software that was bought for millions of dollars and it was not used. So I guess the difference in terms of B2C versus B2B or enterprises, with enterprise, you're able to get a higher average contract value. With B2C, I guess it's a little bit different. However, with B2C, your experience would be probably much faster. Like you would probably know much faster whether you're failing or not, right? Because you're able to set up the validation experiments. You're able to see how well your models are performing. And like if the general audience, if like the prediction breaks and it's not showing anything, like you'll see the drop in customers probably right away. Other than that, yeah, that's actually a good point. With B2B and with enterprise, you have to be vigilant in terms of, let's say you sold this once, twice, 3 times, and then you think you're on a roll, but maybe you just hit the certain segment of the market that this problem is unique, and then you can't really scale, right? So you have to be always thinking about the wider market. Like, are you scalable at a certain point, right? Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but I really like B2C. I have to be honest, I've never done it. So I know people who have done it and like who shared horror stories with me, but me, no, I've always been in B2B. So.
And Mr. McDonald, oh yeah, he says, yep, thanks for the answer. So if you had any follow-ups, feel free to ask them. I think the moral of the story here is I think all of these concepts apply. It just happens a little bit differently. And obviously what you were saying, Yerzat, is accurate, that like hopefully you can run more experiments more quickly, but you might not get the same kind of a deal from your customer because, an enterprise client will pay differently and buy differently. You also have to deal with a different level of maturity, but that you trade that off versus more of like, I guess, the stability. And then your challenge in B2C versus B2B is, okay, B2C, you're probably solving a single use case, and therefore you're going to spin up a whole new value proposition for a parallel use case or a side use case. Whereas in B2B, you might have the ability to sell essentially the same box somewhere else. And that's, I guess, in the back of your mind. That the first one through is when you learn everything and you figure out all the kinks around it. And then what you're really, really, really trying to make sure of on that first one is that the model can be, brought over. And if that's not the case, then you've really got to think through your economics, because you're going to have a lot of operational expense in making this portability. But I think that was a really, really good answer. Thank you very much.
On that point, I actually want to say, I think I've seen this a couple of times where, the AI startups that do B2C and enterprise, they actually go through very similar paths, all of them. They start with services, consulting, they figure out a product at some point, and then they're actually transitioning into a product-based company, right? Like they create a platform, they create applications or use cases on top of the platform, and then they start being more product-based, right? Where they're not chasing any clients anymore that much, but they're able to say, oh, we have an AI product, and they start thinking in product terms, not services terms, because that's also a very important distinction to make when it like changes everything. Once you start thinking about your company as a product-based company, like your sales changes, your price lists change, like the way you talk to customers changes, like the assumptions you make, everything changes, right? Like the support and what your internal team is focused on changes as well. So usually 7 years, you do consulting services, blah, blah, and then at some point you start transitioning into a product-based company. And hopefully, you're able to sell that platform or product on a service subscription basis to more people.
And Mr. McDonald 911, there's some really good guidance on this kind of a consideration on the A16 and Z podcast, or they also have a blog where they get into this book pretty deeply, and it's actually a really powerful series of topics they talk about on the AI powered business, given that they've been investing in them for, I have no idea how long, but a long time. They've kind of seen the economics play out.
I actually recommend Horowitz's book, Hard Things About Hard Things, if anybody wants to read it. It's a very good take on startups.
Oh yeah. Very good recommendation. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes before we'll wrap up. So is there anything else in the remaining content that you'd like to really hit home before we kind of just devolve into conversation and figuring things out together as a team?
Yeah, I guess this one is, explainability. I talked a bit about it, but a lot of times what I found is, we would be explaining these confidence intervals and what will happen in the future, and then we're trying to explain the internal workings of a neural network. But one piece of advice is to make things simple, but not simpler than they need to be to confuse people. And then just do a validation run. It's very hard to explain. You need to try, I guess. But the way to do it is start with the results, and then if people ask questions about how you get the results, go with models. Don't start with models and then talk about results, because then you lose the audience, and then it's like a whole mess. So this is about, what matters and what doesn't matter. If you're a startup or you're doing these things, you might, if you hit something, you might be actually asked to do interviews, go on TV shows, I don't know, be in newspapers, people coming to you for demos, and competition will try to, so that really doesn't matter that much. It matters to a degree, but what really matters at the end of the day is your users. So that's on the left, that's the on the screen, right? That's what we delivered, and on the laptop. The value that you bring them and the results that you achieve, that's what matters. The data you're able to get and learn from and train your models on is very important. All the validated learnings, right, that you go through, the experiments as a lean startup is very important. The processes you learn throughout these times is also important. And then, figuring out the technical roadmap, you need to be on the lookout for the best architecture out there and trying to actually use it maybe in your journey. Everything else is, PR, TV, appearances, competition. Don't let it take too much of your time, is what I'm trying to say. So I guess my whole point of this presentation was to think holistically. Don't only focus on the models. Don't be spending all of your time on getting the best model before you actually validate the fact that simple models bring results, and then you can actually improve and iterate. And then learn as much as possible about the domain you're trying to go through. And at the end of the day, it is much more fun doing the machine learning part, compared to other things. I can attest to that, because before that I was doing some other stuff, and the level of excitement when you actually try to implement ML is not comparable, really. Because if you actually get it working, then it's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it.
this has honestly been one of the best talks I've ever been, witness to, let alone having the honor of facilitating. So thank you very much, Yerzat, for the kind of going behind the scenes of seeing what an enterprise AI initiative looks like. And I really like how you've kind of summarized it here, that you got to be adaptable, because your playbook is not going to meet all of the situations you're going to deal with, and therefore have a team that is also adaptable, have a team that is ready to go and make it happen at the end of the day. And that speaks to that perseverance piece, right? And I think you also have to think about that in your implementation, that this is not a one-shot thing. This is going to be a relationship. This is going to be a series of ongoing conversations you have with your customer to make sure that not only do you understand the data and you understand the problem that they're working with, but such that you can actually get closer to other problems they may also have. Like you had spoken about the fact that their inability to visualize the information in the cloud meant that you just being able to provide that as peripheral or adjacent value meant that they could give you, you probably got a lot closer to them as a result of that. But on top of that, when that plant manager comes around and goes, is this thing even working? Well, it might have been that the AI thing isn't working yet, but man, they've done a great job for us and we like them. Is more likely going to be able to help you continue with this relationship while your machine is coming online, while it's coming together. And I really like the idea of you not only going with the models. The last statement that you did, or not one of the last ones, but like it's been powerful. It was like, think results first. Don't think straight up. The models are going to make people's eyes glass over, and then they're just going to fall over, and then they're going to stop listening. The other reason why they're actually bringing you in here is not just because they can say they've done AI. In a lot of cases, it's because not only they've done AI, but it got better results, and that outcome is going to be more powerful. And then, like, I think the last point where you've got right is make sure you're having fun. Make sure this isn't just a grind and you're just like dragging yourself through it. Like this is going to be a really big thing for a really long time. And even though you're going to have to get through these hurdles for the first series of clients, because as it's going to be a lot of adaptability, that once you've got it figured out, it's not as much of a mess as it probably would the first time through. So I really, really appreciate it. I'll give it to the audience for a little bit. There is one question that I promised Zach that I'd get back to, which is when you're putting this in front of a client, and this is for the scientists in the room here that are going, man, I have a really, really good idea to tell you about how well this machine is performing, but I'm going to have to, translate this into something that the client understands in terms of value. Like, how do you turn, the area under the curve, the F1 score, or, one of these accuracy metrics into a net present value number, or, an internal rate of return value? Like, tell me more about, that translation, such that, these people can, or everybody can get into that conversation and know that they're putting it in front of the client in a way that makes them see the value in it.
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, I just want to say, Ashley, do you say this to every guest, that this is the best talk you had?
No, this is the first. This is the first. This was really good, man. I thought it was really, really good. It was awesome.
Actually, Zach's question is very good, on point. One of the things we didn't touch on is the ability to tell a story. Narratives are very important whenever you're presenting anything. Doesn't have to be in front of a client. Even when you're presenting internally, right? It's all about, let's say you have a team meeting, right? And you don't want to lose time, right? Explaining something. It's very important to prepare and like tell a story. Like you worked on something for a week, which is why you have showcases in Agile, right? Well, it's actually another thing we didn't touch on, Agile versus waterfall, whatever. Long story short, I think hybrid approach works best. So have a story in mind. And I think a lot of the data science courses emphasize it, but it's also very important in the real world, where I see a lot of data scientists and machine learning engineers. They just start out of nowhere with something, and you're like trying to go through the weeds and what's happening, show me something, right? But have a storyline that you walk people through, and you tell a story with the numbers, for clients especially, because you want things to flow one after the other, and make like for a powerful narrative, which is actually it also depends. Real life depends, right? I know a lot of consultants are trained, like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and they're trained on this. Like they can do great presentations. However, you know what would happen sometimes? You're working on a deck for a week. You think you have it all figured out. Great. You go 5 minutes into your second slide, and the client just asks a question, just throws everything off the rails, and you have to like think on your feet, right? So yeah, the original question was about
how do you translate
all
these AI-based metrics for value?
This is very important. Yeah, this is very important. When you do the validation, try very hard to validate the numbers, the numbers that your model is predicting. Like, try very hard not to validate on monetary value, because you calculate the monetary value based on some kind of other metric, right? Like in our case, let's say, for example, this was prediction of overloads, right? Or the amount of material that goes into the mill, right? So we had to tie our validation only to whatever the model was predicting. So you go top bottom, figuring out the KPI, you go top bottom. So every business has cost, revenue, right? Drivers. So which one are you on? You going up for cost? Okay, keep going down all the way until you figure out that lower level cost driver that you're hitting, and then figure out how your model actually does help in that regard. And when you do the validation, focus on in our case, it was materials, for example, right? We focused on like comparing materials spent from last year versus this year when our model was running. And that way we were just able to say, okay, this is the material, like we didn't tie it to the monetary value. So you actually like have to always be thinking about that alignment. I know it's very, very confusing, maybe explanation, but I really have to like go into a specific situation to be able to tell you how to align a KPI with. And actually, one of the slides. Sorry. I know. We wanted to ask.
Keep it coming. We still have time.
So yeah, this is the ML canvas. I actually found it very useful to think about. Just try to use tools like this, to align everybody on the same page and like think about it holistically. Yeah, but it's very important to get that KPI to target for your model alignment early on, because it will also lead to an interesting situation where if you're able to get everybody aligned early on, you will have a situation where your ML researcher or ML engineer, if he's tuning a model, he doesn't have to come back to you and ask, okay, I can tune this model 1,000 ways. Like, which one do you want me to? Once you tell him once you tell everybody the target and everybody sees how it's tied to the KPI, well, people will be able to make decisions on their own. Easy to say, but hard to do in practice.
Well, I think the key learning here is that yes, get alignment on what you think what the value is that your machine will generate from that single prediction or that single event that your model is attaching to create value, but as well, get as specific as possible. And the reason for that is because that way you can really isolate where your machine is adding value, because you had said this a long time ago at the very beginning of this, is that the disruption is going to be manifested in multiple places. And therefore, I think it allows you to have a more focused discussion when you're as close to saying, when they make this decision, if they get it right more frequently because of our model, it equals this amount of value. It's not that there is a holistic approach, because those are much more easy to debate. And it's way harder to have this conversation later when you didn't have that conversation up front, which is what we're going to target, is this exact decision at this exact point, because then they might not attribute the value to you, and it makes it easier to displace in the future. So it's a really, really sticky thing, the more specific you can be.
Also, another thing, whenever you're stuck, talk to the user.
Yeah.
just get on the call and just talk to him.
Yeah.
You will get out of so many sticky situations.
Talk to the user. I feel like we should just get T-shirts that say, AI and products, undoing messes. Talk to the user.
Because
So
we're technical people, right? We want to over-engineer solutions usually, but it's very important to just maybe there's a solution that the user can help you with, right? Like if the problem is, let's say, GPUs or resources, right? Maybe the client will be able to buy some for you versus you having to go and rethink architecture or something else like that, right?
Well, ideally, they're also aligned, because you had said this earlier, right? Is figure out what makes your champion successful to make that a win-win. Because if you have a problem that is going to slow you down, making it a win-win on that champion side, make them go, you know what, I've got a couple $1,000s in the budget. What did you need? I'll figure this out. So I'm just going to kind of wrap things up. So Zach says, was that taken from the business model canvas on your machine learning canvas? I think if you just type in AI in Canvas, you'll find a billion of these. But this one specifically, where did you get this one?
Oh, this from this is from Louis Dorart. If you type in ML Canvas, he has a free ebook and a free template. So this is one of the things I stumbled upon. So it's if you type it in, it is inspired by a business model canvas, exactly. But which is basically the same purpose. The business model canvas exists to get everybody aligned on the business model, and the ML canvas exists to get everybody aligned on ML. Because once you grow, you'll have salespeople, you'll have management, you'll have software engineers, you'll have domain experts. And it will be very hard to keep everybody on the same page with what you're doing. Communication becomes important.
Amazing. So in wrap up, I did take a couple of notes as I went. So I'm just going to kind of talk through some of the key lines that we heard today. So the first one's kind of been explanatory the entire time, which is get the client data as soon as possible, but involve them in the process as much as possible. I thought this one was funny. Put AI where it hurts. The other one I have here is, and this is a really, really key line, and I hope everybody takes away, which is, success will depend on how well you understand the data. And that makes this as much a communication challenge as it is in a modeling challenge. So, aligning with that client to make sure that they're providing you the explanation behind what the data means and how it was applied is going to make it much easier for you than having to infer something and maybe getting it wrong. Making sure you identify and go through a champion early, and make sure that it is a win-win. So when you succeed, they succeed, makes it more likely that you will get somebody who can help you navigate some of these, call it organizational challenges, that you may come up against in the future. Try to move from POC to paid implementation as quickly as possible, and plan that in advance in order to make sure that you aren't investing a lot of money in opportunities that aren't going to turn into profit if you are successful. Make sure that's already in there in terms of the legality as well. So get friendly with lawyers. I can't recommend that enough in my startup experience as well. Now, when we get closer to the users, it's important to get them hooked and help them understand why you're there, but make it an experience that they will not only get value from, but they can also reconfigure to their needs. So plan for a little bit of flexibility on the user side. Let's see what else I had. The last point I have here, which is they think results and not models. Make sure that you're translating whatever you're developing into not a series of mathematical diagrams that make it impossible for anybody to understand, but make it really about the outcome that the client is going to get out of it. Okay, so I have to say again, thank you very, very much, Yerzat, for the great talk today. And yeah, we'll be looking forward to you sharing some more information in the future. Anything else that you would like to just summarize with before we conclude?
No, I'd just like to say good luck, everybody. Hopefully it was useful. Yeah, and I didn't scare too many people away.
Yes. Well, even if it was scary, this is an opportunity for you to use this as motivation. That the challenge is a barrier to everybody else getting into it as well. So if you're up for it, you're likely to have fewer successful competitors. So use that as inspiration and motivation, not as something to discourage you. All right. Well, thank you very, very much. And to everybody online, thank you very much for tuning in today. We really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.